It could come off a tramp steamer just outside the international waters on our East Coast. A nuclear weapon that a terrorist could buy or build, steal, put on top of a missile that's easily bought today on the open arms market, and detonated over Pittsburgh, for example, at 100 kilometers, would expose over 1.5 million square miles of the United States, all the way from Boston to New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and even down to Knoxville, Tennessee.
When we try to devise a way to defend ourselves from the enemy's weapons, we must first look at the will of the enemy and then the enemy's capacity to carry out their malevolent goal. It's been made perfectly clear that the Iranian government wants, at the very least, to take out the United States as a leading world power, and at worst, it wants to bring an end to Western civilization as we know it.
There is nothing we can do to hasten the return of Jesus in Christianity and the Messiah in Judaism. However, in Islam, the Shiites believe they can actively participate in preparing his way by creating a world catastrophe according to their teachings. The mullahs in Iran believe they are the appointed ones to make this happen.
U.S. military and law enforcement have the weapons, and countries are now not only weaponizing, but we believe are in an arms race using this technology in the last few years. Well, if they're in an arms race, you know it's effective, number one, and number two, it's going to get into the wrong hands sooner or later.
I'm going to talk about the societal impacts from what I call an extreme geomagnetic storm. People that say, well, nobody's going to do attack us with an EMP attack. They can't make that same statement about natural events.
A lot of the focus has been focused on, well, we need to be prepared for the peak of the sunspot cycle. In actuality, large storms can and do occur at any time during the sunspot cycle. They're almost as probable of occurring in the next month as they are in the upcoming peak of the next solar cycle, which will be around 2012, 2013.
There are relays that operate inside of substations that are not manned. If those relays do not operate properly, you've got big problems. The transformers are not protected from the surges as the network goes down.
Today's military rely on commercial electric power in order for any of its forces outside of its strategic forces to function. Without electric power, troops can't move, aircraft cannot deliver supplies, equipment can't even be fueled. Battlefield communications, the trump card for the American fighting forces, would become non-existent.
In our view, the modern society is characterized by the presence of three things: clean available water, properly functioning sewage and sanitation services, and electricity. And I would further assert that because the first two systems rely on electricity to function, we really at base need electricity to have a modern society.
The trend in this country is toward ever more sophisticated electronic systems. The increasing dependence of the United States on an electronic economy increases the vulnerability of the banking and financial infrastructure to the effects of electromagnetic pulse.
There's really no excuse for the country to be vulnerable to EMP. There are solutions to this threat. In fact, the EMP Commission came up with a plan that could be implemented quickly and at relatively low cost. And there are even things that individuals can and should be doing to protect themselves and their families from EMP. And I would urge the American people not to wait on Washington to implement solutions, but to act now to do the simple things that could be done to protect yourselves and your family, to write your congressmen and your senators, to get Washington to act, because the only thing that's lacking right now is political will at all levels of government to follow the EMP Commission recommendations to protect the American people.
Given the severity of the consequences from an EMP attack, any federal response will be fairly meaningless to state and local governments because the federal government's going to be entirely focused on continuity of government issues. They're not going to have the resources nor the time to be kind of out there into the communities as you would, let's say, President issues a FEMA declaration and out comes all these federal resources. That's just not going to happen.
Can you imagine an EMP event where you call 911 and no one's coming? Because They don't have the capability, the communications capability, the resources to be able to effectively deploy to your region or your area.
Drawing attention to a national issue that frankly would not be understood by very many people absent a conference like this. When people would say electromagnetic pulse, I suspect people's eyes glaze over. But if we don't educate them, where do we go on this? And frankly speaking, we are not prepared as a nation to face the threat of EMP at any level of government.
We're not ready. We're just plain not ready. Whether it's a natural event from the sun or whether it's an event that's created by a nuclear blast or even another form of EMP, we're not ready.
We've heard a lot about bringing it to the attention of government. Had several meetings with congressmen, county executives and such, and when Mike Nolan goes in alone, it usually doesn't mean a whole lot. But when he walks in with 50 other supervisors or 100 other mayors, our federal officials begin to listen.
How are we going to get this information out to a public that is resistant to hear it? It's going to be very challenging, and my hope is that this meeting will be the beginning of some serious thought on how we do this, because it can be done.
With appropriate technical actions, worst-case EMP effects can be somewhat, if not substantially, mitigated. It takes focused leadership, some resources, but most of all, coordinated actions across the Congress, the industries that are involved here, and in particular, I think getting first-tier industries involved, incentivized and resourced, and especially the executive branch departments to achieve real and substantial actions on mitigating and hardening.
One of the brilliant things we have is we have a stimulus package that's passed. The money's there. The amount of money we're talking about, $4 to $5 billion, is what America spends at the movies on weekends in a year and a half. I think we can afford it.
But then there's a good news story here. Because Peter's work and the Commission's work, they've come up with a series of recommendations. So we know what to do. We know what we can do, and we can do it together.
Many of these people, former CIA directors, former directors of the Defense Nuclear Agency, EMP commissioners, the foremost scientific experts on EMP phenomenology in the world, went to Niagara Falls to speak directly to the American people because they were so frustrated that Washington hasn't been listening.
This little effort that we were trying blossomed to where 700 people came. Everybody paid attention and were impressed. And I understand from Peter that many people in Washington were affected by this.
It has had a powerful impact. The fact of that conference has attracted an unprecedented amount of media attention to the EMP threat. And it gave hope to those in Congress who've been fighting an uphill battle and has carried us actually to the threshold of victory. Never before has there been so much public knowledge of EMP and determination to do something about it in the halls of Congress.
Think about what you personally can do to help save our country and civilization from the train that is surely coming down the tracks.